Welcome, aware, anda, dumalang, molo,
Sabona.
hu kandat, and a warm welcome to the Induvo Knowledgecast, the podcast where your curiosity meets insightful conversations. The Musi Rico Amba, a lekker discussion about something that might seem a bit complicated at first glance. Separate financial statements. And we're going to be looking at the guidelines that govern them. Specifically, the International Accounting Standard 27, or IAS 27 for short. Now, you might be thinking, accounting standards. Man, that's for the big shots with fancy suits. Not for me. But think again. Whether you're thinking about investing in a company in the JSE or just trying to understand how your favorite local business is really doing, getting a grip on IAS 27 can unlock some serious insights. It's like having a secret decoder ring for the world of business. And to help us crack the code, we've got a true expert in the house today. Someone who can make even the most intimidating financial jargon feel like a comfortable chat over a cup of Ribos tea. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into this with you and our listeners.
All right, so full disclosure. I'm looking at this document on IAS 27, and it's a bit dense, even for me. I get the basics of financial statements, but what throws me off is this whole idea of separate financial statements. We always hear about consolidated statements, right? What's the difference, and why should we even care?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something that often trips people up. You're absolutely right. We hear a lot about consolidated statements, which give us that big picture view of a company's overall financial performance. It's like looking at the entire landscape of the Kruger National Park from a helicopter. You get a sense of the vastness, the different ecosystems, everything connected.
Okay, I'm picturing lions, elephants, the whole shebang.
Exactly. But sometimes you need to zoom in and focus on a specific area. Maybe you want to study the behavior of a particular lion pride, or analyze the impact of a drought on a specific waterhole. That's where separate financial statements come in. They allow us to zero in on a specific part of a company's operations, like a subsidiary, a joint venture, or even a specific investment.
Okay. So it's like switching from the helicopter view to getting down on the ground with a pair of binoculars. You can really see the details and understand how things are working at a more granular level.
Precisely. And that granular view can be incredibly valuable, especially for someone trying to understand a company's investments and how they contribute to its overall financial picture.
Now I'm starting to see why this is important. But if I'm looking at a company's financial reports, how can I tell if they've prepared separate statements or not? Is it always obvious?
That's where things can get a bit tricky. Sometimes companies are legally required to prepare separate statements, especially if they have publicly listed subsidiaries. Other times, it's a strategic choice they make to provide more transparency about specific parts of their business. But finding those separate statements can sometimes feel like searching for a rare protea in a vast fund vase. It takes a bit of digging.
So it's a bit of a treasure hunt. But knowing what we know now, it sounds like it could be worth the effort. If I'm thinking about investing in a company, wouldn't I want to see those separate statements to understand how their investments are performing?
Absolutely. It's like checking under the hood of a car before you buy it. You wouldn't just want to know it runs. You'd want to see the engine, check the oil, make sure everything is in good order.
That's a great analogy. So separate statements are like the mechanic's inspection report for a company's investments. They give us a deeper understanding of how those investments are running and what kind of shape they're in.
Exactly. They can reveal a lot about a company's strategy, their risk appetite, and how they manage their various operations.
Now, the document I have here outlines the objective of IAS 27. Basically, it says that the goal is to establish clear principles for presenting these separate financial statements, especially when a company is invested in subsidiaries, joint ventures, and associates. But why is it so important to have these standardized principles?
Yeah.
Couldn't companies just do their own thing?
You hit the nail on the head there. Without these standards, it would be like trying to understand a conversation where everyone's speaking a different language. Chaos. Imagine trying to compare the performance of two companies, one using its own unique method for accounting for investments, and the other following IAS 27. It would be nearly impossible.
Okay, so IAS 27 is like the universal translator for the language of separate financial statements. It makes sure everyone is speaking the same language so we can actually understand what's being said.
Precisely. And that's crucial for transparency, comparability, and ultimately making informed decisions about investments.
But hang on a second. This IAS 27 document mentions something called the cost method for accounting for investments. Isn't that a bit, basic?
You'd think so, right? At first glance, the cost method seems pretty straightforward. You record the investment at the price you paid for it, and that's that. Like buying a beautiful shweshwe fabric. You note down the price. and it stays the same in your books.
Makes sense, simple and neat. But I have a feeling there's more to this story.
You're absolutely right. The cost method works fine for some situations, especially if the investment is a simple, straightforward one. But what happens if the value of that investment changes significantly over time? What if the demand for that swoosh fabric skyrockets and it's suddenly worth double what you paid for it?
That's a good point. The cost method wouldn't really capture that increase in value, would it? It'd be like still thinking your Go-Go's old recipe book is worth only a few rand when it could be a culinary goldmine.
Exactly. And that's where the limitations of the cost method start to become apparent. It can give a misleading picture of an investment's true value, especially in a dynamic market like we have in South Africa.
So if the cost method is like that old recipe book gathering dust on a shelf,
Yeah.
is there a way to account for investments that are more, let's say, alive and kicking in the market?
That's where IFRS 9 comes in. It's like taking that old recipe book, dusting it off, and realizing that those recipes are not just sentimental value. They have the potential to be a hit food stall at the next market.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about this IFRS 9 and how it shakes things up.
IFRS 9 is a separate accounting standard that deals specifically with financial instruments. It's a bit more complex than the cost method, but it allows for a more dynamic and arguably more accurate way of measuring the value of an investment.
So instead of being stuck with that fixed historical cost, IFRS 9 allows us to see how an investment is actually performing in the market, like those Sweshwe designs flying off the shelves.
Exactly. IFRS 9 introduces the concept of fair value, which basically means what the investment could be sold for in the market right now, at this very moment.
So it's like checking the price of avocados at the market every week. You get a real-time sense of what they're worth, not just what you paid for them a month ago. So how does this fair value actually get determined? Is it like a lucky draw, or is there a more systematic approach?
Well, thankfully, it's not a lucky draw. Determining fair value involves looking at various factors, including market prices, interest rates, and even the specific risks associated with that particular investment. It can get quite technical, but the main idea is to arrive at a value that reflects what a knowledgeable buyer would be willing to pay for that investment in the current market.
So it's like a blend of market savvy and financial detective work. You're looking for clues in the market to determine the true worth of an investment.
That's a great way to put it. And using IFRS 9 to account for investments in separate financial statements can give us a much clearer and more realistic picture of a company's financial position.
This is fascinating. We've gone from a bird's eye view of the Kruger Park to analyzing the value of those Sweshwe fabrics. Who knew separate financial statements could be so exciting?
Right. It's all about seeing the connections between these concepts and how they play out in the real world.
Speaking of real-world applications, I'm thinking back to that objective of IAS 27. It emphasizes the need for fair presentation and reliability in these separate financial statements. But how does IAS 27 actually ensure that companies are playing by the rules and presenting their investments accurately? Is it like a financial referee blowing the whistle on any foul play?
That's where the disclosure section of IAS 27 comes into play. It's like the rule book for the game, outlining specific information that companies need to disclose in their separate financial statements.
Okay, so it's not just about the numbers themselves, but also the story behind those numbers. What kind of details are we talking about here?
Think of it as lifting the curtain and peering behind the scenes of a company's investments. IAS 27 requires companies to disclose things like the reasons for preparing separate statements in the first place, the accounting policies they've used for those investments, and any significant transactions that have taken place.
So it's like getting a glimpse into the company's thought process, their rationale behind those investments. And I'm guessing these disclosures can be pretty revealing, right? Like finding a hidden message in a bottle.
Absolutely. These disclosures can offer valuable insights into a company's strategy, their relationship with their subsidiaries and joint ventures, and even their overall financial health.
Now I'm really starting to see how all this fits together. But before we dive deeper into those disclosures, I think it's time for a quick pause to let everything sink in.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned those disclosures feeling like a hidden message in a bottle, because sometimes you really do have to read between the lines to grasp what the company is really saying.
Ooh, okay, give me an example. I love a good detective story. What kind of clues should we be looking for in these disclosures?
Let's say, for example, a company like, how about Mr. Price? They're a well-known South African retailer, but they also have operations in several other African countries. Now, if Mr. Price chooses to prepare separate statements for their international subsidiaries, That's a signal in itself. It suggests they want to highlight the performance of those subsidiaries separately from their South African operations.
Interesting. So it's not just about transparency for the sake of transparency. It's a strategic decision about what they want to showcase.
Exactly. And the reasons they give for that decision can be even more telling. For instance, they might say they want to better reflect the performance of a key subsidiary. That could be a sign that a particular subsidiary is doing exceptionally well, and they want to draw investors' attention to it. It's like saying, hey, look at this shining star in our portfolio.
So it's like a proud parent showing off their child's report card. But what if the disclosures paint a less rosy picture? What kind of red flags should we be watching out for?
That's where those detective skills come in handy. If a company discloses that they're preparing separate statements because a subsidiary is underperforming or facing financial difficulties, that's a signal to pay close attention. It's like a doctor saying, we need to run some tests because something doesn't look quite right.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a death sentence, but definitely a cause for further investigation. Maybe check their financial blood pressure, so to speak.
Precisely. And sometimes the most revealing clues are hidden in the details of those disclosures. For example, if a company mentions having to provide significant financial support to a subsidiary, that could be a sign that the subsidiary is struggling and might pose a risk to the parent company.
So it's all about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture behind those individual disclosures. Now, I'm curious about the different accounting methods companies can use for these separate statements. We touched on the cost method and IFRS 9, but there was also this thing called the equity method. What's that all about?
The equity method is an interesting one. It's like having a front row seat to the performance of your investee, rather than just watching from the cheap seats. With the equity method, you don't just record the initial investment at cost. You adjust it each year to reflect your share of the investee's profits or losses.
Wait, so if the company I've invested in is doing well, my investment on the books actually increases. And if they're doing badly, it decreases.
You've got it. It's a much more dynamic way of reflecting the true value of your investment, as opposed to just keeping it at that historical cost.
Okay, so it's like those taxi fares that fluctuate depending on the traffic and demand. If the company's navigating smoothly, the value goes up. But if they hit some potholes, the value takes a dip.
That's a brilliant analogy. And that's why the equity method is often considered a more appropriate way to account for investments where you have significant influence over the investee, like a subsidiary or a joint venture.
So it's not just about owning a piece of the pie, but actually participating in the baking process. You're invested in their success, but you also share in their struggles. Now, with all these different methods, cost, IFRS 9, equity, how does a company decide which one to use for their separate statements? Is it like choosing between Bunny Chow, Shizanyama, or a Gatsby? Just a matter of preference.
I wish it were that simple. The choice of accounting method depends on a few key factors, including the nature of the investment, the level of control or influence the investor has, and even the specific requirements of IAS 27.
So no one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding the right tool for the job, like choosing the right spanner for a specific bolt.
Exactly. And just like a mechanic needs to know their tools, anyone trying to understand separate financial statements needs to be aware of these different accounting methods and what they represent.
Okay, so we've got our toolbox ready, but I'm wondering how this all plays out in the real world of South African businesses. Can you give us some concrete examples?
Absolutely. Let's take a company like, say, MTN. They're a major player in the telecommunications industry, with operations across Africa and the Middle East. Now imagine MTN wants to assess the performance of their Nigerian subsidiary separately. They might choose to prepare separate financial statements for that subsidiary, using the equity method to reflect their share of its profits or losses.
So it's like separating out the biltong from the druze in a mixed bag of snacks. You can see how each one is contributing to the overall flavor profile.
Exactly. And those separate statements would give MTN valuable insights into how their Nigerian subsidiary is performing, its growth potential, and any challenges it might be facing.
But wouldn't that information already be included in MTN's consolidated statements? Why go through the extra effort of preparing separate ones?
That's a good question. Remember, consolidated statements give you the big picture, the combined performance of all of MTN's operations. But what if you want to understand the specific factors driving the success or struggles of their Nigerian subsidiary? That's where separate statements shine. They provide a more focused lens, allowing you to see the details that might get blurred in the consolidated view.
So it's like comparing a panoramic shot of Table Mountain to a close-up of a single protea blooming on its slopes. Both are beautiful and informative. but they offer different perspectives.
Precisely. And for investors or analysts who are particularly interested in MTN's presence in Nigeria, those separate statements would be a goldmine of information. They could reveal how MTN is navigating the Nigerian market, their competitive position, their regulatory challenges, and even their strategies for growth in that region.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So separate statements are like a spotlight, illuminating specific parts of a company's operations that might otherwise be hidden in the shadows of the consolidated picture.
Exactly. And understanding that spotlight effect can be incredibly valuable for anyone trying to make informed decisions about investments.
Now, I can't help but wonder if this whole concept of separate financial statements has become even more relevant in today's world. I mean, with businesses becoming more complex and globalized, wouldn't it make sense to have more detailed and focused financial reporting?
That's a really astute observation, and you're absolutely right. As businesses expand across borders, invest in diverse industries, and engage in increasingly complex transactions, the need for clear, concise, and informative separate financial statements has never been greater.
So it's like trying to navigate a bustling city like Johannesburg.
Yeah.
You need a detailed map that shows you not just the main highways, but also the side streets and alleyways to truly understand the city's fabric.
That's a perfect analogy. And just like a good map helps you navigate a complex city, separate financial statements can help investors and analysts navigate the intricate world of modern businesses.
Okay, so we've established that separate financial statements are important. We've explored the different accounting methods, and we've seen how they can reveal valuable insights about a company's investments. But let's be real for a second. How much attention does the average South African investor actually pay to these separate statements? I mean, let's be honest, they can be a bit dry, even with all the shweshwe and bunny chow analogies we've thrown in.
That's a fair point. And you're right, separate financial statements often don't get the same attention as the consolidated ones, which provide that big picture overview. But that's precisely why we're having this conversation today. We want to empower our listeners to go beyond the headlines and dig into those separate statements, because that's where they might find those hidden gems of information that inform their investment decisions.
So it's like going beyond the tourist attractions and exploring the hidden gems of a city, those off-the-beaten-path places that reveal its true character.
Exactly. And sometimes those hidden gems are the most rewarding discoveries. For investors who are willing to do the homework, separate statements can offer a deeper level of understanding about a company's structure, strategy, and financial health.
This is brilliant. We've gone from being a bit intimidated by those separate statements to actually being excited to dive in and see what they can tell us.
And that's the beauty of knowledge, isn't it? The more we understand, the more empowered we become to make informed decisions.
Now, before we get too carried away with our detective work, let's take a step back and consider the bigger picture. We've talked a lot about how IAS 27 provides the guidelines for these separate statements. But as the business world keeps evolving, do you think this standard will need to adapt to keep up with the times? Is it like that old pair of tackies that need a bit of a revamp to stay relevant?
You've hit on a really important point. IAS 27, like all accounting standards, needs to be a living document, evolving to reflect the changing landscape of business and finance. We've already seen several revisions over the years, and I have no doubt there will be more to come.
So it's like a chameleon, adapting its colors to blend into the ever-changing environment.
Precisely. And those adaptations are crucial for ensuring that separate financial statements remain relevant, reliable, and informative for investors and all stakeholders. Now, as we wrap up our exploration of separate financial statements, I want to leave our listeners with a key takeaway. It's this. Don't underestimate the power of these statements. They can be incredibly valuable tools for understanding a company's investments, their strategies, and their overall financial health.
That's a powerful message. So next time you're looking at a company's financial reports, don't just skim the consolidated statements. Take a deep dive into those separate statements. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Absolutely. It's all about being an informed and empowered investor. And remember, knowledge is power.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of separate financial statements. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us. I feel like we've unlocked a whole new level of understanding.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Indugo Knowledge Cast. Remember, stay curious, keep learning, and always ask questions. That's how we grow. Until next time, goodbye and stay sharp.